I mean, the question is not us. The question is, how do you view sovereignty? The question is, why does it frighten you? Why is sovereignty an issue? That's the question.
The earth is all-powerful. Wasn't made here for human beings. He said we're part of it. But we don't have to be here because the earth has its own process. And if it becomes to the point where you destroy yourself as human beings and you destroy life and finally leave this earth, the earth's not going to disappear. There's not going to be an end of the world. That's really a very interesting concept to us. No, the world won't end. People's life on it will. So it's not the end of the world you're talking about, it's the end of us. And the world, no matter what damage you think you've done to it, will regenerate, will regreen, will redo everything that was here at one time, except there won't be any people. Because it's got all the time in the world. The leadership that we're looking for has to come from business. Very, very important now because business carries more authority and they carry the economics of the world. Today, we're bound together much closer than we were so many years ago, 1,000 years ago. We're neighbors and we're bound together by electronics. We're bound together by technology. And the world has become, quote, a market. And it's this market that we have to deal with. And it's this idea of boundless and endless resources. And when you say resources, you're talking about our relatives. You're talking about our family. Fish are our family. It's not a resource, it's a family. It requires all the respect. The structure of the world itself is such. It functions on natural law, and the natural law is a powerful regenerative process. There's a process of regeneration that continues and grows and is endless. It's absolutely endless if everyone agrees to the law and follows the law. But if you challenge the law and you think you're going to change the law, then you're bound to failure. And then that failure will be a lot of pain because the natural law has no mercy. It is only the law.
Six Nations were powerful enough to fight, powerful enough to organize, and were a tremendous threat to a government which was brand new, which had just come through 7 years of war, which had no resources to depend on from England anymore, had cut themselves off from their father, and so were more or less tired, and they were exposed. And so they were now facing possibility of an all-out Indian war with the Six Nations at the head. So that treaty was made from a point of common sense on their part, and a trade on our part to secure our own territory never moved. Where that great tree of peace was planted by the peacemaker at Onondaga, where I come from, the council fire, the firekeepers of the Six Nations, so like the capital. We are bound to protect that territory at all costs, where he planted that tree of peace. That is our charge. And so this is how they decided they would protect it. And they had the power enough to force a treaty. There was no other, the other answer was war. And the Six Nations was willing. Our great law did not allow for us not to defend ourselves. So we were in a position where they had to make a decision. Were they going to fight or were they going to treat? And at that time, we treated on a point of equality and power for peace. And so we secured our territory, supposedly forever, or as long as our two nations existed.
When Columbus came to America, he thought he landed in the Indies. So he called everybody Indians, and that was the first mistake, and we're still called Indians. And it's all right, but we have our own names. Every one of our Indian nations has a name, and that's who we are. So when we were getting ready to come over there, we said, well, how are we going to call ourselves as a common name? And so we had a meeting up in Vancouver, 1975. It was at that time that we said, we'll call ourselves Indigenous. And prior to that, there was no discussion about Indigenous. That was our determination, our self-determination to do that. So Indigenous became, when we said we are the Indigenous people of the Western Hemisphere. That was our presentation of ourselves.
Okay, no, but what I understood from Rabbi Sodentorp was that he saw, somewhere along his travels, he saw a meeting where a feather was used. There was an Indian meeting, Indian being American Indians, and he saw that it had authority, and also there was great decorum that goes with it and protocol. And there's varieties of protocol for Indian nations, but almost all Indian nations, and indigenous people for that matter, do not interrupt the speaker. That's a very bad form to interrupt the speaker. And so, on certain occasions where it's important to hear everyone, and they will use sometimes what they call a talking stick, which is could be any kind of an instrument that's been designed to be used at a meeting like that, and great care, or simply a feather. And the feathers with Indian people, as you know, is very, very important for us. And the reason why is that birds have important role in the discussion of everyday life. They tell you a lot of things. And if you learn their language, you know what they're saying. And they're always busy. They're always around. They have beautiful songs, and that's their first work is to wake everybody up. And they move as soon as daylight moves, and they are moving, and then they're the first thing that you hear. In the new dawn, the new day, you'll hear the birds, you'll hear their message. And you get to appreciate that and to recognize them as friends and as partners in life. And you greet them as well as you greet the new dawn with a thanksgiving, as we do with everything. Birds have different work. Different birds have different work, of course, and they're all important. And there's two very special birds. Well, there are many. I guess they're all special when you come to that. But two that we depend on a lot. One is the very tiniest of birds, the hummingbird. This bird really is what we call a messenger. It's always good news when a hummingbird comes around. It's always nice to see them. And they're around when things are blooming, and you see them very, very active in their search for food, and you know, they're synonymous. Hummingbirds synonymous with flowers. And so it's very important and always a very good sign when a hummingbird comes through and is around. And then on the other side of that spectrum is the eagle. And the eagle in indigenous people is recognized as the leader of the birds. And the reason why they revere the eagle, at least from the Haudenosaunee side or the Iroquois side, and pretty much the way I understand it around the rest of Indian country, is that
The eagle is the most powerful and flies the closest to the Creator. And therefore your words, he carries your words on his wings, and he carries them as the messenger who reaches closest to the Creator. And so we value his feathers, and we value his presence. And along in that direction, and this is an eagle feather. This is an eagle feather. Comes from the wing. This is a wing feather. And this you will find almost all Indian nations somewhere, a headdress or somewhere you'll find that eagle feather. And then another very large bird in the east is turkey. This is a turkey feather. And they, of course, serve a great purpose. They serve a great purpose in terms of keeping the grounds healthy, and keeping the keeping watch on lands and territories. And they're very watchful birds, and they're also very, very good to eat. They share themselves with us, and people are very grateful for the turkey. This is a wing feather. And this is a tail feather of a red-tailed hawk. And the red-tailed hawk does the same work as the eagle. They're up there very high, and their feathers, and the eagle feathers, and the turkey feathers as well, are used. You'll find them always somewhere on headdresses and so forth of our people, because they tie us together with the creation. And so when someone is standing, and that's one of the protocols where we come from, when one speaks to a group, they stand. And they stand because they are respectful and humble in the presence of all the people there. So they stand in respect when they speak. And as long as someone is standing and speaking and carrying a feather, it's very bad form to interrupt him. And so they symbol and respect that he's speaking. When he's speaking and he's carrying this feather, he's also announcing that everything he's saying is the truth. And this is what the eagle represents, is a messenger to the Creator, and he's not afraid to speak the truth and to speak what he feels. And so when a person is standing, and he's often see this as a leader, he'll be carrying a feather, an eagle feather, and people listen in respect to the protocol, to the person, and to the eagle and the feather that it represents. So somewhere, my very old and dear friend Rabbi Sodentorp saw this
And he thought that this would be a very good idea to, in its simplicity, because it's not complicated at all you have to have is a feather. And so, in its simplicity, to hear the youth, and in particular, he wanted to speak about the youth. And it is, in these times, very troubled times. And in particular, the youth are troubled, and they're worried, and they have a variety of feelings. But in speaking to some of them, they feel abandoned by society, and sometimes by their own family. They feel as though nobody is looking out for their interests and their welfare, and nobody is caring for them, and they feel as though they're not prepared, they're not secure, and that's a very bad feeling for a child to have, or a young person, because our work as adults is, of course, to teach and to translate and to prepare the youth for the work that they have to face and for the life that they will be leading when they become adults and carry those responsibilities, which are very heavy.
We always wondered why did they think it was right or just to do what they did was to take our lands and to push us off our lands and try to eliminate us as a people. And then we discovered this doctrine of discovery, and it just kind of made things understandable as to where they got their direction from.
When Columbus landed, and he went back, and he reported, and they said then, the leaders, and the Vatican was the most powerful voice in the world at that time. A papal bull, 1493, 1 year later. If there are no Christian nations in this new land you have discovered, I declare those lands to be empty. Terra nullius, very old Roman law that had been exercised in Africa, India, Europe. Further, if there are people there and they are not Christians, they do not have a right of title to land. They have only the right of occupancy. From our perspective, the same right as a rabbit running on the ground, or a turkey, or a deer, or a buffalo, or an Indian. They do not have a right of title to land. 1823, Supreme Court Justice John Marshall adjudicating the case, Johnson versus McIntosh. Two white men arguing over Ohio Indian land. He says, "You boys have it all wrong. Don't you understand?
This was settled long ago. They don't have a right of title to land. And he moved that principle into U.S. federal law, 1823. The doctrine of discovery became the doctrine of law today. Christian doctrine, specific. Wasn't Muslim doctrine, wasn't Jewish doctrine, Christian. And it prevails. It's here, it's a reality, but most people don't understand that, and most people don't know that. We didn't even understand that on 1990, 1991, when I first really said, wow, what's the doctrine of discovery? What is that? A young man by name was Steve Newcomb said, I got something, you guys gotta see it. Came out of Peru. Came out of people down there that were really digging. It was a unspoken conspiracy by states going on all those years. Shh, don't tell the Indians. We found out anyway. Eventually, finally. 2007, Oneida versus New York, court case. First notation by a Supreme Court Justice, doctrine of discovery. 2007. It's not alive. I think it's alive and well. 30-year court case for Onondaga Nation, dismissed out of hand. Oh, you guys were too slow, it's too late. Let's make up, new latches, we'll call it. Besides, it's disruptive to our people. That's what the justice said. It's disruptive. No discussion about our people and about justice and about what's right. The American people don't know about this. Well, it's time they learn. It's time they learn because it's going to take all of us. It's going to take all of us. And I would be very, very, very careful about stamping out the last place that's holding the line the hardest. Haudenosaunee Six Nation. That's holding the line the hardest. For the common good. For the good of all. For the future. That's what I have to say. Columbus. Quite a guy.
At its 8th session in May 2009, the Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues decided to appoint as Special Rapporteur Tanya Ganilla-Frischner, a member of the Permanent Forum, to conduct a preliminary study of the impact on Indigenous peoples of the international legal construct known as the doctrine of discovery, which has served as the foundation of the violation of their human rights, and to report thereon to the Forum at its 9th session. This preliminary study establishes that the doctrine of discovery has been institutionalized into law and policy on national and international levels, and lies at the root of the violations of Indigenous peoples' human rights, both individual and collective. This has resulted in state claims to and the mass appropriations of lands, territories, and resources of Indigenous peoples. Both the doctrine of discovery and a holistic structure that we term the framework of dominance have resulted in centuries of virtually unlimited resource extraction from the traditional territories of Indigenous peoples. This, in turn, has resulted in the dispossession, impoverishment of Indigenous peoples and the host of problems that they face today, on a daily basis. That's just the opening shot. Given the United States of America as a federal Indian law is most accessible to the special rapporteur, and because it serves as an ideal example of the application of the doctrine of discovery to indigenous people, this preliminary study provides a detailed examination of the premise of that system as found in the United States Supreme Court ruling Johnson's Lisi versus McIntosh. That's the one. Evidence is then provided demonstrating that the doctrine of discovery continues to be treated as valid by the United States government. The Special Rapporteur concludes by recommending that an international expert group meeting be convened to discuss in detail the findings and the implications of this preliminary study of the doctrine of discovery and present its findings to the permanent forum at its annual session. Further study and review will be needed to ascertain to what extent and how the doctrine of discovery and the framework of dominance are applied to indigenous people throughout the world. It was accepted, and 2012 has been designated the year when an expert study will look at the doctrine of discovery on the international construct, which really shakes the root of all colonization. It challenges title to land. And so, yeah, McIntosh, that was where they installed it right into US law, where Judge Marshall said, well, he said, the lands we've been taken has been taken under this structure, and we're not going to change now. Or we jeopardize everything that we've taken so far. So that became U.S. federal law, the doctrine of discovery. In 1955, when the Gitsan Indians challenged, they were refused on the doctrine of discovery by the Supreme Court of the United States. And again, 2007. Well, it didn't surprise us, because we've been in this field, we've been working at this, but the rest of the country has no idea. You don't have, I know that. Just a few people here have an idea what this is. So, justice. You know, when the peacemaker made our confederation, he said 3 principles. Peace. First principle, peace. Second principle, equity. Equity for the people. And the third principle, the power of the good minds to be united in thought, mind, and spirit. Power. This will give you authority. They stand there today. Those principles are still here. And we have to adhere to them. There's a lot of work ahead. There's people suffering in all parts of the world, and we have to be responsible. I had just graduated from Syracuse University, and they were having a big celebration at Onondaga because I think I was the first graduate from Onondaga. My uncle said to me, sitting on the Council of Chiefs at that time, and he said, well, let's go fishing. And I said, that's a good idea. Yeah, because I knew he's a good fisherman. He knew where everything was. And so we went fishing. And he took me out on this lake, and we're going to fish for bass. So I was very happy to be sitting there in the boat. And they had the motor, small motor, 15 horse. And we went out,
and anchored by a bluff. And a lot of bass there, run right straight down. And so we got our lines out and we were sitting there. And he said, well, you just graduated from university. Yeah, I said, I did. That's good. He said, you know, it's been a long time since we had anybody do that. Yeah. What'd you learn? Oh, I said, I took painting. I learned a lot about painting. That's good instruction, helped me out. That's good, he said. What else you learn? I said, I learned about people. We're pretty much brought up at Onondaga. And I said, different kinds of people. They think different. Yeah, I says, that's very true. He said, what else? I said, well, we had a good coach. Coach Simmons, good lacrosse coach. Nice man. Yeah, he says, I know Coach Simmons, a good man. Very nice man, he said. Well then, he said, he was sitting there. Then you must know who you are, he said. And I said, yeah, I think so. So we're just quiet for a while, and he says, can you tell me who you are? And I began to understand that I was sitting on one end of the boat, and he was on the other end of the boat by the motor, and I was kind of captured there. I said, well, I'm Joey Quisson. He said, it's an old name, he said. It's an old name. Yeah, I said, I have that name. And I went on through my name, Oren Lyons, my mother's name, my father's name, and their clans. My father was an eel, my mother was a wolf, and we go by the mother's side, so Wolf Clan, yeah. And then he would say, and that's it, huh? That's it. That's who you are. And I realized, that I was being really cornered here, and he was pressing me. And I went on to everything that I could possibly think of, and every time I would finish, he would say, that's it, huh? And I said, well, that's all I know. All right. Need help? I said, yeah. Yeah, apparently I need help. All right, he said, let me help you, he said. And on the bluff, just as I could say right where we're sitting here, and I could point to that tree up there. And that's what he did. There was a young pine growing off the bluff, gripped right into the rock, He said, you see that young tree? I said, yeah. He said, well, that's who you are. You're the same as that tree. He says, you see how it's holding on to the earth? Yeah. He says, that's how you are. He said, we're dependent. We're rooted on the earth. He said, we're part of the earth. We're the same as that tree. He says, you're the same. You're the same as that tree. You need water, you need light. You're dependent. He said, without the earth, you wouldn't be here. He said, that's why we say, our mother. He says, because it's your mother. He said, you're dependent, total dependent. I said, I see that, I understand that. And he said, Oh, he said, watch your line, you got a bite. And we caught a lot of fish that day. He didn't ask me any other question. But when we got home, I thought about this. I said, you know, he planned that whole thing from when he said, let's go fishing. Because he could see that I was arrogant in my position of who I was, and feeling pretty good about myself, and feeling pretty, I guess, I don't know, feisty, whatever all you want to say. And he could see I needed some instruction. And he must have planned that whole thing. You know, as time went on, the more I would think about it, the more I realized that he was concerned I was going to be going off in the wrong direction. I really needed help. So after 4 years of university, I learned more on that boat. A couple hours. So, and instructed by a man who never went beyond 5th grade, who knew a lot more than I did. And so it gave me a base of reflection. He gave me a lot that day.
I said, now, as you're coming down the final stretch, you're racing towards the finish, and there is the stone wall, and you're not pulling your horse. You're not stopping. You're in fact accelerating. I said, now, that's the way I see the use of what you call resources. You're using them faster than they're reproducing. And you're headed towards that disaster, and none of you are pulling your horse. I said, take the example of a car race or racing cars. They have a yellow flag. When there's an accident or something, a yellow flag comes out, everybody gets into line, and they slow down, and they have sort of a common sense about that, at least. I said, do you have a concept of a yellow flag? Is there a yellow flag amongst your ideas or your thinking here? And one of the gentlemen, and they were all men, maybe 50 to 60, 65. He said, you know, he said, I understand what you're saying, but to answer your question, no, we can't. We can't pull our horse, as you say, because, he said, we have to show a profit. As a CEO, I must show a profit. If I don't show a profit, he said, I'm fired. Simple as that. I'm out of a job. I have to show a profit. I said, to who? He said, to you, the stockholder. I said, well, are you married? He said, yes, I am. I said, do you have children? He said, yes, I do. I said, do you have any grandchildren? He said, I have two boys. I said, when do you cease to be a CEO and become a grandfather? There was a lot of silence there, because that was a moral question. And if you don't have a moral question in your governing process, then you don't have a process that's going to survive. That's the governing law, the moral question. You must have a moral society, or you won't have any. He couldn't answer the question, and neither could anyone else, because it was a moral question. That's what we have to get back to. So they said, well, got kind of heavy silence there. So they said, look, you're an Indian, and we keep hearing about Indian prophecies. Can you give us a prophecy? Can you tell us a prophecy? And of course, I told him a lot, because I know a lot of them. But at that particular moment, I said, certainly I can. And I can guarantee it. I said, really? Well, what is it? I said, next year you'll meet and nothing will have changed. And again there was silence. We're moving in a very direct line to that stone wall. I do not believe personally that we have passed the line or the point of no return. But we're approaching it. We're approaching it. And every day that you don't do what's right is a day that you've lost an option. And you're losing your options every day.